And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres with Scoop Duck on 3, coming to you from Long Beach, California. It's Monday, May 6th as we record this, but as you listen to it and watch it here on the Scoop Duck YouTube channel, it is Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. And we're going to be talking about Oregon versus Ohio State. Is this going to be one of the better rivalries, not only in the Big Ten, but all across college football? But before we get to that, you guys know how it works. The Ducks Dish podcast is brought to you in part by Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your dinner plans are tonight, but head on over to Ranchito Grill, 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. Try their homemade tortillas. They got great food, a great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy, Ruben, and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Guys, I am fired up for today's episode because we have an awesome guest that is on here with me. We got the man himself, BigTenTed, is here to talk some Ducks versus Bucks. Ted, how you doing, man? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing good, man. It seems like there's been a lot of Oregon appearances as of late, which kind of maybe signals a trend. It signals a trend that they're very excited about what's kind of coming down, the news that has been happening, transfers, and just the hype that continues to build for the season. You mentioned that October 12th matchup against Ohio State that we're going to be talking about today. And Ducks family has swarmed in to the channel on YouTube. They've swarmed into Twitter. They've swarmed into the podcast. They are taking over the polls that I'm putting out there. We're trying to be as objective as we can, but we've got Oregon fans just coming in and showing Big Ten Nation what it's all about over here. So it's great to be here. Great to talk to you guys. You guys do a great job over there at Scoop Ducks. I'm excited to talk about all things Bucks and Ducks.
Appreciate it, Ted. Yeah, man, they're fired up. The Duck fans are fired up to be heading to the Big Ten. But before we kind of get into it, man, you haven't been on my show before, so I just wanted to, ask you a little bit about yourself and let the people know where they can find you.
Yeah, born and raised in Big Ten country, from Wisconsin, and then eventually migrated to kind of where I'm at now in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. Started originally on YouTube. The BigTenTed on YouTube really started in COVID, and then it really started the beginning of the 2021 season is when I started previewing games, recapping games on the channel, and then it really spawned off from there, started doing interviews, and things really started to evolve off a little bit more of a Twitter presence now, started the audio version of all this stuff. So it continues to kind of build, and especially with the expansion to the West Coast, you have some big time fan bases out West that are excited to maybe learn more about the Wisconsins, Minnesotas, Nebraskas, Ohio States, Michigans, Michigan States, teams like that, their future opponents. So it's a very fun time to be, I think, in the position that I am right now. But this has always been something that was always on my radar for a long time. And when I was sitting at home doing nothing during COVID, it gave me the opportunity to, hey, let's start this thing up. And it's gone pretty well so far. So excited. The West Coast schools and fan bases, like we said, with Oregon have come in and they're eager, they're wanting to learn more. And that's kind of made it very exciting, very fun here, really ever since last summer when it was announced that Oregon and Washington were moving over.
Well, you're doing some great work over there on your YouTube channel, and definitely want to tell my listeners and everyone to check out Ted's work on YouTube and the like. So we're glad to have you here, stoked to have you on and talk some Ducks versus Bucks, and glad to have you guys, the listeners, the viewers here on the pod, and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. We just hit 1K and we're going up. So Ted, man, let's get into this a little bit. We're going to talk about how Oregon and Ohio State really stack up on the field, because Oregon's heading into the Big Ten for their first season in 2024. The Buckeyes have always been there, and they've always been the top dog, really. Although Michigan obviously kind of took that away from them in recent years. So let's kind of just drop into this big picture question. How do we think Oregon and Ohio State ultimately stack up?
Oh, they're 1-2. Right off the bat, even though Michigan has won the conference for 3 consecutive years, of course, the 15-0 national championship last year, they're certainly going to be in the mix. But when you look at all of the pieces that Michigan lost. You look at maybe their best quarterback in program history, 10th overall draft pick in J.J. McCarthy. You look at Blake Corum, right, who was a staple in that run game for the last 3 years. Oh, how about their entire offensive line that won not one but 2 Joe Moore awards, the best offensive line in college football. They return a good amount on defense, but their offense, and then you lose, of course, your head coach Jim Harbaugh to the LA Chargers. So you're losing a lot at Michigan, but you look at these Oregon and Ohio State football teams, and they are loaded, and they are pushing all of their chips into the middle of the 2024 table, right? You talk about in today's current climate, it's about putting your money, literally, your money where your mouth is. And these two programs, Ohio State and Oregon, have certainly done that. Their NIL collectives have certainly backed it up with what these types of transfer classes that have been able to brought in at both Ohio State and Oregon. And I think that's why they sit here right now. They're experienced. Okay. They're good up front. Okay. These are both, I think, going to be physical football teams at times. We know Oregon, like you guys, know all about Oregon, what Will Stein wants to do offensively, right? He wants to mix it up. They are going to be, explosive through the air. Look at Bo Nix, what he was able to do, completing nearly 80% of his passes last season. So they certainly do want to throw the football over there, but Oregon can be physical also at times. I said it with Michigan a lot last year. They can beat you any way they choose to beat you. I kind of view Oregon as that way as well. TBD what Will Howard can do over there at Ohio State. But these two teams, they stack up. They're in a tier by themselves at the top of this conference. And then maybe you look to your Michigans and your Penn States before that. Then maybe you trickle down to your USCs, Wisconsins, Iowas, Washingtons, whatever, those types of teams over there. So we're all excited for October 12th, but I don't think there's any doubt that Oregon is ready for Big Ten play. I think what they've done recently, specifically in the transfer portal, getting a guy like Derek Harmon. Okay, you look at Jamari Caldwell in the winter window as well. That's nearly 700 pounds of Big Ten beef up front, right? We love our big boys. We build teams from the inside out in this conference. Look at the way Michigan was able to win a national championship. So I think Oregon is really steering into that. They bring back a majority of their offensive line as well. So this is a team, right? When you talk about West Coast football here in Big Ten country, we have maybe a certain connotation of what it is, right? Maybe the guys aren't as big, not as physical. Big Ten teams can kind of come in and push them around. Kind of look at what happened in the national championship against Washington, right? But you look at this Oregon team. This is a physical team. This is a big football team up front.
And Ohio State, just to get into a little bit more of them, Ted, I feel like they have the history and they've been kind of executing the blueprint that Oregon has been striving for. That's not to say they have the same formula, but before Michigan really came up under Jim Harbaugh, at least in my lifetime, right, more recently, Ohio State was really the cream of the crop. They were right there with your Alabamas, with your Clemson, and with your Georgias. So it feels like Ohio State's had a little bump in the road because they haven't been able to get over that Michigan hump in recent years, but man, they are as good of a team as you'll find anywhere in the country. They produce guys at every position, it feels like, especially defensive linemen and wide receivers, obviously. So they have a lot of momentum going into the 2024 season because last year wasn't bad, but it wasn't the mark that they've been used to. And they've really added some big pieces in the transfer portal. Obviously, Quinshon Judkins, who we've talked about, Will Howard, Julian Saban comes over, Caleb Downs. Oh, my God. He's like the biggest transfer portal commitment of the entire offseason, it feels like. And we got another Oregon connection because Chip Kelly's your OC now that Bill O'Brien took that Boston College head coaching job, I believe. So Ohio State, they've got some momentum, and it really feels, to your point, like they're going all in.
Yeah, you talk about what they were really before Michigan took over. This was a team that won, not one, not two, not three, but 4 consecutive Big Ten titles, 5 in 7 years. They were the program that everybody looked up to. And it almost seemed like it was impossible that one day somebody was not named Ohio State, was going to win a Big Ten championship. But when you look at some of the pieces, like you mentioned, that they added this year, take out Caleb Downs, they returned almost all of their defense from last year. And Jim Knowles, the former defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State, has done a tremendous job with this Ohio State defense. Even if you don't have Caleb Downs, this is still one of the best defenses in college football, right? What you have up front, a really good 3 all-conference defensive linemen returning with Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimaluo coming off the edge and Tyler Williams on the inside. Linebacker, they had to replace a few guys, Tommy Eichenberg, Steel Chambers as well. They've got some, but once again, this is a recruiting machine, right? They've got 5-star guys plugging into the linebacker room, and they were solidified in the secondary. And then you bring in not just a freshman All-American, not just maybe one of the best young defensive players, but overall defensive players in not only the portal, but in all of college football. You look at what Caleb was able to do at Alabama. I think, over 100 tackles, I think, last season. I think he may have led Alabama in tackles. So now you add him to the mix. Okay, it's had a domino effect a little bit because you have guys that were maybe solidified at safety. Now they're moving into linebacker where they needed a little bit more depth. So Caleb kind of slots in at safety. I've talked about it off season with Oregon. It's depth of talent. It's great to have 1 through 11 on a starting lineup, whether it's offense or defense, right? Really talented people. But what about your 2s? What about your 3s? Oregon is building that. Ohio State certainly has that. When you recruit at the top 5 to top 3 level that the Buckeyes do every single year, you're going to have that. And then you add in these transfer portal additions. That defense is nasty. Like, they are really good on all levels. The really big question I have with linebacker, when you replace your Big Ten linebacker of the year, that where Tommy Eichenberg was last year, some experience, but like I said, Cody Simon and others are going to be able to plug in and really do some good things. CJ Hicks, I think, was a 5-star linebacker that should be able to plug in for the Buckeyes in the middle of that defense. You switch over to the offensive side of the ball, boy, it doesn't stop there when it comes to transfers, right? Quinshon Judkins, you mentioned him when he was stacking up 1,000-yard seasons in the SEC. Trevion Henderson has kind of been banged up a little bit the last few years, and then you put those guys, but when he's healthy, he is one of the most explosive backs and maybe one of the best backs in the entire country. Now you combine him with Quinshon Judkins. Boy, it's a shame there's only one football, right, to carry both of these guys. I was saying this before, earlier this offseason, there's a likelihood that, you had got Quinshon, who I believe at least 2, maybe 3 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons at Ole Miss. And then you look at Trevion, like I said, he's been banged up, so he hasn't really gotten to that 1,000-yard mark. But there's a possibility these guys of this talent, neither of them gets to 1,000 yards because there's only one football. And then you add in Will Howard, who was involved with the K-State run game over there, right, in some design QB, RPO, reads, types of options, type of things like that. So, and then that kind of expounds. And then you got maybe one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country. Like, that's what we're talking about with the depth of talent. It's going to be very different because if your listeners, your viewers are kind of coming into this, when they think of Ohio State, especially maybe in recent history, they think of CJ Stroud, they think of Justin Fields. You could go back. You could think of Dwayne Haskins. You could think of JT Barrett. You could maybe think of some of these other guys where they always have a pretty good quarterback and they can hit the home run ball deep. And especially as of late, they've got really good wide receivers. Okay, I always said if you want to beat Ohio State, you have to try to prevent the home run ball. Last year, you kind of saw it with Kyle McCord, where maybe he couldn't push the ball down the field. He didn't have the arm talent of a CJ. He didn't have the arm talent of a Justin Fields. So you saw this team maybe get more traditional Big Ten, right? More run game, physical, lean on the defense a little bit more, which is crazy to say when you had 18 out there. When you had Marvin Harrison Jr., which in 3 years could be the best wide receiver on planet Earth, right? So that's crazy enough to kind of think about it that way. And Kyle's stats weren't terrible. Okay, mid-20s, I think, for touchdowns, 2,500 yards. But that, I think, goes to show you that at the end of the year, this coaching staff said, thanks, but I think we're moving on. We have higher expectations at Ohio State. So you look at what Will Howard, that's such a key thing right now, because I wouldn't call him maybe an elite quarterback or where he was at Kansas State. But I think now he's playing with better talent on the outside. I'm very curious to see how they mix him into this offense. It's no guarantee he'll be the starter. Devin Brown, it's been reported out of Columbus, Devin Brown is really pushing him at spring camp. Now, Devin Brown was in that position battling with Kyle McCord last year and wasn't able to beat him out. He was kind of banged up a little bit throughout spring ball, fall camp, and it didn't really work out. But reports out of Columbus right now are saying that that's a battle right now between 33 and 18 in that quarterback room. So that should be something to keep an eye on as we approach this fall and to see how that really meshes and how their offense really looks, because both Devin and Will, although they're both mobile, I still think they maybe bring a little bit of a different skill set apiece.
Lots of good stuff there, Ted. I mean, I like what you said about Ohio State last year, how they were kind of leaning a little bit more on that defense, because coming out of the 2022 season, that was kind of the knock on Ohio State, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have all this talent, but they just weren't able to put together that elite defense that they really needed. And Ryan Day made adjustments as needed, had some changes on that defensive staff, and that really helped propel them forward in 2023. So now it seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, it seems like the question marks or where the area to grow is maybe a bit more on the offense. Like we just don't know quite as much about where the offense is looking like with some of those guys coming in, like Will Howard and Chip Kelly obviously coming in as that OC.
Boy, I see what you're saying, and it's a little tricky because you are correct in saying that there are questions, but there's really good players over there. Like, that's the thing. You've got the best running back room in the country, probably. At least we'll go tandem. We'll go 1-2, right? With Dallin Hayden now transferring out to Colorado. So you've probably got the best 1-2 in the backfield. Your offensive line, maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later on. They've got some question marks, right? They did not look good in that bowl game against Missouri over down there in Dallas. So, but then you look at this wide receiver room. You got Emeka Ibuka coming back, who was a 1,000-yard guy last season. You've got Jeremiah Smith coming in as a true freshman. He's at the least the number 2 in this wide receiver room, right? I watched that spring game, and he didn't catch a ton of balls in that spring game, but they were trying to get it to him. They were trying to throw it to him. They wanted to see this guy make a play. Like, so that kind of told me just how valued he is within this Ohio State pass game as well. There's lots of other options. The thing about Ohio State's wide receiver room is we see a lot of guys coming in this year. Jeremiah Smith is one of those guys. But you look at Brandon Ennis from a recent recruiting class. You look at Carnell Tate, right? They got some catches last year, but they were behind a really good and really loaded wide receiver room. Now it's their time to step up. How good are these guys? So where is the depth? Those are maybe the question marks on the outside. But the biggest one of them all, I think right now, is Chip Kelly. What is this offense going to look like? Okay, is this going to be more of a spread power run game that we've maybe seen in the past from Chip Kelly? Or is Chip, right, or is Ryan Day saying, hey, Chip, we got to evolve a little bit. We got the best wide receiver room, arguably. Okay, your Duck fans might argue with that. We arguably got the best wide receiver room in the country. We got to evolve a little bit. Okay, we got to throw the ball, 60-40 throw, whatever they got to do. But then you look to the quarterback. Is Will Howard going to separate himself as the guy? Is he the passer that Ohio State is maybe used to at that position? Or is it Devin Brown? Or it's probably going to be Will Howard, right? They brought him in, I think, for a reason. Okay, I think Devin is going to stay within this competition and they're going to push each other. I believe it's going to be Will. Maybe they could alternate during the non-conference like Michigan did. Who knows? But I believe it's going to be 18 when all is said and done. And then the question is going to be, do you have a quarterback back there that can make a play when you need him to make a play? That's going to be the big question. There's questions, but you got problems, but they're good problems to have because you feel confident about the talent that's certainly in Columbus on offense.
Let's talk a bit more about the Oregon side of things here, Ted. Let's shift it a little bit because this isn't the first time these two teams have played heading into 2024, right? The Ducks did get the better of the Buckeyes back in 2021 in Columbus in the shoe. Ducks were able to get that win 35-28. I was actually there. That was my first time in Columbus. It was an amazing experience. Environment was unbelievable. And I can't help but think, man, Oregon was able to go in there and beat the Buckeyes with Anthony Brown as their quarterback. I'm not trying to drag Anthony Brown, but my God, how times have changed because now Oregon's coming into this game against Ohio State in 2024 with Dylan Gabriel, one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the country. And I think Dan Lanning's really got this thing humming at the line of scrimmage. And I also feel like I'm really interested to see how Oregon's defense transforms in the secondary because We know with Ohio
Yeah.
State, that's the team you got to slow down through the passing game. And I think they got some really good pieces in the DB room coming in with Jabbar Muhammad, Cam Alexander, Kobe Savage. And then that's not even to mention some of the young guys that they got in that room. Jaleel Florence is one of them as well.
Right.
I think that Oregon is really suited and kind of, I'd say, built to contend and beat a team, even though, like Ohio State, they've become a really good program, a powerhouse.
Boy, that was the first year I was covering games. And if you would have asked me, hey, Ted, before this, without saying that, who was the quarterback of Oregon that beat Ohio State? I probably would have drawn a blank. I was like, wait, Justin Herbert left in 19, who's or 20 or whatever it was, whatever year that was. And it's like, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to fill in the blank there. So I was like, oh, that kind of brought the light bulb back on for that game. I remember that game and watching it. I'm like, Oregon just out Big Ten Ohio State. They just smashed it. I remember their run game really got going, and they were running downhill a lot during that game. And that was maybe because that was 2021, right? That was the first year that Michigan really got going 3 in a row against Ohio State. And maybe Ohio State fans at the time in the moment didn't really see it that way. That was kind of the start of maybe the narrative that Ohio State really needs to toughen up, right? That was maybe if where's Lou Holtz is the end of it right after that game against Notre Dame. That was maybe the start of it when Oregon was just able to run right at Ohio State in their house and out Big Ten them from a team out west. But yeah, there's when you look at the Ducks in how they formulated their football team, I look at some games last year. Right, there were points in that Washington game, I think, where Bucky Irving and that run game really started to get going a little bit more and started to run downhill maybe a little bit. And you could really tell that this team was built big on the inside. But when I look at this specific matchup between Ohio State and Oregon, I love the matchup when Ohio State has the football. I should say I love the matchup from a neutral perspective, because what you've gotten recently in Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell up the middle. Amari Washington is a guy I think that you guys are excited about, and the depth in that defensive tackle room. And then you look at the O-line and the matchup of those two behemoths kind of going after each other is certainly exciting to kind of look for. But when I look at this Ducks team kind of moving into the Big Ten in year number 1, and I look at games on their schedule, they got Ohio State on their schedule year 1. They got Michigan on their schedule year 1. They're going to have to line up at the line of scrimmage and take on the toughest, most physical football teams in the country. And I believe right now, that they're going to at least be able to hang with them in that part of the game. It remains to be seen if they can win that part of the game against a team like Ohio State or a team like Michigan. But then you look at it on the flip side, is you look at some of these traditional Big Ten teams, and because this thing goes both ways. Okay, you look at it from the flip side. Have they seen that they're not used to defending Tez Johnson and Gary Bryant and Trayshawn Holden and Evan Stewart out on the perimeter, especially maybe some of these other Big Ten teams that you're going to play. But Ohio State, I believe that they can match up with maybe some of these. There's so many great matchups, and this is what we love as maybe football junkies as well. What happens if these receivers can separate? Well, what happens if these corners can lock down? What happens if Ohio State can run the football? How do they read and react? That's what makes this game so fun, because there's NFL players all across the field, and it's all about the matchup with which future pro is going to beat the other future pro.
And I don't want to put too much weight, Ted, into that win that Oregon had over Ohio State in 2021, but it really did feel like it was kind of a transformative win for the Oregon program, because Mario Cristobal obviously showed that he kind of had some of his deficiencies as a head coach. We've seen some of those show up in Miami as well, but Oregon wasn't able to get the job done down the line in that 2021 season, getting beat repeatedly by Utah. You can definitely attribute the second loss to I think what was going on with his job as far as going to take that Miami job. I feel like they definitely knew that inside the building to some degree, but that win over Ohio State, I think, really showed that Oregon was heading in the right direction. Dan Lanning comes in and just absolutely picks right up where Mario left off and just ran with it. So I think that this Oregon team is really built to contend with a team like Ohio State. And what might be helping them a little bit more here, I don't know how you kind of evaluate things. Ohio State has to come to Eugene. they're coming to Autzen.
Yeah.
That was a game that a lot of Oregon fans probably feel like they got robbed of in 2020 because there were wildfires, there was COVID. I mean, that just adds that much more. And Carlos Laughlin's on the staff, by the way. Can't forget that one. It just adds that much more to the drama and the excitement in that game.
Boy, okay. So this is what I absolutely love about how the way the Big Ten shaped their TV deal. Okay, because you guys out west, because that's a game, as you just said, it's in Eugene, Oregon. Okay, one thing that maybe some segments of Big Ten fan bases aren't exactly loving. I like it, but some fan bases aren't exactly loving is these noon kickoffs on Fox. Right, the Fox has really established that as the prime TV window. But the Big Ten has said that there's going to be no 9 a.m. kickoff. So that will not be a big noon game on Fox. And here's what I'm rooting for. If it's CBS in the 3:30 Eastern window, okay, that's great. That's fine. It's going to be great. But I want to see it under the lights. I want to see it in that primetime slot on NBC. I'd love to see Oregon, maybe some really dark black uniforms and really lean into that theme. I thought maybe a blackout was maybe one of the jersey themes and the crowd themes that could exist over there at Oregon with all of those multifaceted uniform combinations. Like, that's the thing for me that gets me most excited about this is the potential of, and this is why networks like CBS and NBC are investing so much is to these types of matchups, Oregon and Ohio State. This is why people have been talking about this ever since the schedule and the dates were released. Oregon, and that weekend, by the way, is going to be full of great matchups. You got Penn State and USC. You got Iowa and Washington. Sit your butt down at big noon and just stay there for 12 hours. You're gonna have great games. But that game in Eugene, and that is, I've personally never been there, but how it pops on TV. And, based from what I heard, of course, this as well. It's a very loud venue, and that certainly gives Oregon an advantage, especially if the Ducks can really say they get the ball, they march down the field and they're going up 7-0 right away, right? You get that crowd into it. That's just when we deal with Big Ten venues and some of these very loud venues, these what I call the 100Kers, right? Your Ohio States, your Michigans, your Penn States, right? Where they can get on top of you. And once they get that lead, 7 points, 10 points, etc., it can be very difficult to bring back. So for Ohio State, you got to try to take the crowd out of the game early. But yeah, Oregon obviously has to play into that factor as well. That's one when it was announced Oregon was joining the Big Ten. We're very traditional in our uniforms, right? You look at Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Iowa. I love the difference that is Oregon, right? Then I think that's going to be fun matchups when you look at Oregon and Ohio State uniform-wise on the football field. And then I thought of that atmosphere. That atmosphere at Autzen Stadium is going to be great. There's going to be a lot of excitement. So, yeah, having that game in Eugene will certainly be an edge for the Ducks.
I want to talk some more about Dan Lanning as a head coach because he's a younger head coach. But, man, I think if you watch the way this guy operates, you wouldn't think that because he has just got this thing humming. And I think you have to say that Oregon's as hot as any program in the country right now, whether that's what they've been able to do on the field. Obviously, last season didn't end the way they wanted to. They wanted to get to that playoff, but the way that he's retooled and reloaded, added some pieces to his staff when necessary. I think that he has proven that he's a coach that isn't stubborn. He's willing to evolve, willing to admit his shortcomings and just adapt to the game as is necessary. Because, Ted, that's one of the big differences that we've seen between Dan Lanning Oregon teams and Mario Cristobal Oregon teams. Mm-hmm. There's times, I firmly believe this, when Mario Cristobal was the head coach, Oregon would go on the road and you didn't know what kind of team you were going to get.
Right.
With Dan Lanning, he's got these guys dialed in, and Oregon's become a team that can win on the road, which is so important. Like you said, when you're going to have to play in those 100Kers, when Oregon goes to the big house in 2024. So I think even though Dan Lanning is a younger head coach, I mean, you can't really ask for a hotter start to a head coaching career than what we've seen so far.
Boy, he is, just based on his experience, I know he beat 2 top 10 teams at the time in his first year. UCLA, I think, was number 9. Utah, I think, was number 10, his first year as head coach of the Ducks. But he doesn't, as of right now, doesn't have a huge marquee type of victory. Had certainly an opportunity that a couple of times last year against the Washington Huskies, but I think there's plenty of opportunities, as we mentioned, on the schedule this season. But I'm very impressed with Dan Lanning. My first really glimpse of a Dan Lanning coach game and team was that October matchup against Washington. You could say maybe it came back to bite him a little bit, but I love the aggressiveness. That's one thing that really popped out in my mind right away. This guy wasn't playing. A lot of times when you get into those situations, a lot of coaches can settle, hey, let's try to kick the field goal even when we're behind. But Dan Lanning had his foot completely down 100% on the gas pedal. That impressed me, his aggressiveness, and that really stood out to me. But then you look, and once the season has kind of concluded, and then you look at what he's done, and he's adapting, I think, to the new age of college football, because there's going to be some coaches. There are some coaches that are currently coaching in the Big Ten that are pretty old school that will probably be left behind in terms of maybe competing at the top of the conference. Okay. But Dan Lanning has certainly steered into this is what we have to do to win. Okay, let's do it. Right. Let's make it happen. Right. Let's spend $20 million on a team in NIL or whatever it ends up being on some of this talent, what it takes to get into this. I had him ranked right now 5th in my Big Ten head coach power rankings, just because he's very young as a head coach. He's a little bit inexperienced, but I said he's this close, right? In that maybe the Vegas game against Washington, that close to maybe being number 3 or number 2, right? He is so close right now. I think everybody's seeing this offseason. Okay, he's building, okay, maybe correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like he's building the best roster in Oregon history right now. And
yeah. No question.
So like that, and in such a short period of time, right? He's been able to stack these recruiting classes. He's been able to do big things in the transfer portal. And now I think this year is really the big year, right? Year 3. A lot of times when you take over as a head coach, it's year 3. That is the year when things usually pop. Sometimes do it. Some people year 2, some people year 4, but usually right around that year 3 mark. And now the expectations, I think, are building up for Oregon. You got big games on your schedule. You got the Michigans on your schedule. You got the Ohio States on your schedule, Wisconsin on the road at the end of the year. So there's going to be big opportunities to get that big marquee win that we talked about. Of course, trying to finally beat Washington at the end of the year. Once again, going to have the opportunity to do that. But I've been very impressed with Dan Lanning. It would not surprise me in like 2 years for him to be maybe the top coach in this conference, right? I really believe it is trending in that direction. But obviously, you got to do it on the field first. Okay, he's won a lot of games that I think he's supposed to win. And I think I was on the QB11 show with Doug and QB last year, and I think they mentioned as it pertained to Mario Cristobal, I feel like these are, I think, their words, not mine, but there was always a game in there that Mario, you should have won, and you came up short. There was maybe one game in there, maybe every year. It's like, man, that was frustrating. Why do we come up short in that game? I feel like with Dan, you win the games you're supposed to win, right? There's no, just off the top of my head, there's no loss to Washington State. And, it's like, well, how do we lose at home to Washington or whatever it be, So I feel that's the mark of a really good program. And Dan is like, the thing is, he's been asked many times in media about like, hey, you're moving to the Big Ten. Does that mean you need to get more physical? And he's like, well, we're building a team to compete in the Big Ten. We're competing a team to compete nationally. It doesn't matter what conference we're in. And I love that mindset because it tells me that even if the Pac-12 were still a thing next year, this is a team that would still be ultra physical. Because you look, he was the defensive coordinator, of course, in Georgia, that great 2021 Bulldogs defense. And I look at what Georgia was. They were strong in the trenches, and they built that team from the inside out and had a dynamite defense. And I think he's taking some of the blueprint there. It's not a complete copy and paste, but he's taking some of the blueprint of what he had at Georgia and really trying to translate it over to Oregon as they make the move to the Big Ten.
He certainly took what he found at Georgia. That was the blueprint, the Kirby Smart blueprint. That's what he's operating with. And I think for as rough of a start as it was to the Dan Lanning era, getting just the doors blown off of you by Georgia.
Right.
I think they really took that and are learning from it, and they're putting guys in the NFL, and that's huge. But before we get into kind of this other part of the show,
Sure.
Ted, I want to I'm glad that you talked about just like for all the great things that Lanning's done, you need to have those marquee wins.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he necessarily has those just yet. And that's the thing. They were in those games, though. Both of those Washington games, Oregon was in it until the very end. But you don't get the hype and the acclaim for almost winning. You got to get the job done. And Dan Lanning, I think, has done everything, the way he speaks, the way he operates, to show that he is hungry and wants to get over that hump. So for Oregon to be viewed as, like you were talking about earlier at the top, like 1A, 1B, or 1 and 2 in this conference with Ohio State, obviously he's the thing that makes this machine go. And I think he's really onto something.
Yeah, I think he's proven it. I mean, in almost every category. He's proven it, stacking these top 10, top 5 recruiting classes. We know he can recruit. I said it in my coach rankings. If we're doing recruiting rankings, recruiter, I should say rankings, he's probably number 1. Maybe Ryan Day is up there as well, but he's right at the top of the list. I don't think you can really doubt that right now in his ability to acquire talent, transfer portal or high school recruiting. Okay, you got that. That's what it's all about. It's about recruiting, bringing up a foundation, getting good players. Okay, the really good championship level teams, the Georgias of the world, the Michigans of the world, most of the time they're not number 1 in the transfer portal recruiting rankings. You know why? Because they recruit really good players and they develop good players, and all the players want to come to their program. Oregon is getting to that level, certainly with the classes that Dan Lanning has been able to stack on top of each other. Now it's up to taking those talented players, the Mateo Uyungleleles of the world and some of these other players that they've recruited the last 2 seasons. It's time to take them and develop them into first-round NFL draft picks, second-round NFL draft picks. That's why this year is so key for those second-year guys, those sophomores, those redshirt freshmen. If they maybe don't pop and perform as a true freshman, right, it's the transition from high school to college. We get it. But now in year 2, it's so big to really take that next step forward. And I feel like forever Oregon has been, from afar, Oregon has been that team that they have all the makings to be that elite level program. They have the facilities, they have the financial backing, they have the support, right? There's no doubt what the priority is at Oregon. Okay, at other schools, there might, especially out west, right? You look at your Cals, your Stanfords, or some of those schools, UCLA's, schools like that, there may be a little bit of a doubt of what your priority is in the athletic department. There's none of that in Eugene, Oregon. We know football is what's really important right now. And then when I look at what Dan Lanning and his attitude is into building a football program, it certainly appears that it's definitely his priority to build a winner. And Dan Lanning, is that the missing piece that has existed all this time? Maybe. Is it the combination of Dan Lanning and the move to the Big Ten Conference that could maybe take Oregon to that next level, right? Because maybe the move to the Big Ten for some of these teams will force them to maybe get out of their comfort zone to get bigger, to get tougher up front and become more of a complete football team. Will it force Lincoln Riley at USC to get better on defense and better up front on the lines? We're already seeing it at Oregon, I think, before this Big Ten move. But now I think nationally, this Oregon team, they're already a national brand, but they are in position, I think, with Dan and the move to this new conference to maybe be that program to really stick out. And boy, the Big Ten, if you thought it was difficult before, right, you've got adding a team like an Oregon at the top of your conference. It is going to become that much more difficult. But I think it also pertains to maybe the flip side of these West Coast teams kind of coming in and playing Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State. Like, it's a different style of football. I believe Oregon is probably best suited to deal with that different style of football, but it's still different. And it's different for both sides, right? There's going to be, I'd have to look at, like, Purdue, for example, is on Oregon's schedule this year. They haven't seen a conference opponent run offense like Oregon. Okay. Ohio State has maybe been that team, right? Like I said, with the Fields and the Strouds, we've been talking about the Buckeyes a lot during the show. That's the team, right, that has been explosive. But other than that, it's been, we know what Michigan is. We are their grounded pound, they're physical up front, they play aggressive defense, right? And then you kind of take a look at some of these other teams from the West that have been to the Big Ten title game. You look at your Wisconsins, you look at your Iowas, and we know exactly what their formula is to success as well. So it goes both ways. And I always said when these kind of two, the traditional 14 and the new 4 were coming together, it's who was going to meet in the middle. It's not, hey, who's going to throw it 50 times a game, put up 400 yards every game, and all of a sudden that way is going to be the new way in the Big Ten. And these West Coast teams, I don't think we're going to be completely demolished at the line of scrimmage. It was about which programs could meet in the middle. Can Iowa get more dynamic on offense? Can some of these West Coast programs get tougher at the line of scrimmage? I think Dan Lanning, like we said, is certainly building that Oregon program to maybe meet in the middle the best.
Certainly does feel like Dan Lanning is that missing piece, Ted, for Oregon, because he's doubled down on the Ducks, because he has had opportunities to take other jobs amid that crazy coaching carousel. Yep. And he has doubled down and said that he wants to be at Oregon as long as he possibly can. We're talking Ducks versus Bucks, Oregon and Ohio State. I think this is a rivalry that is going to absolutely shake up the Big Ten Conference. I'm Max Torres with Scoop Duck, talking with BigTenTed. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to both of our channels. I'll make sure to throw Ted stuff in the description below. Ted, we've been talking so much about the on-field. I wanted to get to it a little bit sooner, but we were just having awesome stuff, so I couldn't do it. This is a rivalry that has already bled over to the recruiting trail. Yep. That's kind of my bread and butter. I love talking about recruiting. That's part of the reason I moved out to Southern California, because of all the talent out here. Oregon and Ohio State are going to find themselves going against each other on the recruiting trail for top talent. Just a couple of people to name in the 2025 class. You got Jordan Davison, a modern day running back, top target for the Ducks. He's got Oregon and Ohio State in his top 4. You got Trey McNutt out of Cleveland, Shaker Heights, one of the best safeties in America. I think that for as good as both of these teams are on the field, it feels like Ohio State's kind of met its match to a degree in Oregon, because they are just landing and attracting some absolutely phenomenal talent.
Yeah, and when you look at this class, and like 2025 is a very interesting thing, because when you look at Ohio State, they've really gone after defense, right? Those 2 top corners right now that are committed. You look at Devin Sanchez, they're being offered as well. Maybe 2 more Southern guys, but I like how you kind of crossed over the recruiting territories. You look at Shaker Heights and Ohio Mater Day. We know all about, I'm sure you know all about them and what they can do out there, and how much of a factory that can be for Oregon, especially some of these Southern Cal teams like USC and UCLA that are also coming into this conference as well. I'm very curious to see, specifically at the wide receiver position, how some of these recruiting battles kind of carry over, because Ohio State with Chip Kelly and they're loading up on running backs, is this maybe venturing over to more of a ground and pound style? What is going to, and then you look at Oregon, right? That's a team that, yes, they can be physical, but this is a team that maybe is venturing more towards the pass game than Ohio State is. How are some of those wide receiver recruiting battles going to play out in the future? That's interesting, because lately it's been, hey, if you're a top wide receiver, if you're in the top 5, a couple of those guys at least are going to end up in Columbus, Ohio. Now maybe that's changing. I'm very curious to see how that's all going to end up. You still look at this 2025 class. Taven St. Clair, a quarterback out of the state of Ohio, right now is committed. Right now, looking at like the top player in the state of Ohio. So at least quarterback wise, it maybe doesn't appear that that's going to shift. I think this year is going to tell a lot in terms of those recruiting battles in the future. What does a Chip Kelly offense look like at Ohio State? What is the balance? Is this heavy run? Is it more balanced? What is the involvement still of this pass game and these great wide receivers at Ohio State? Because that Oregon wide receiver room is loaded. And then when you have a Heisman caliber quarterback in Dylan Gabriel, Oregon's probably got the quarterback advantage systematically in terms of the pass game, the attractiveness maybe for some of these wide receivers, maybe having a little bit of advantage. Now, it doesn't happen in one year. Right? If Ohio State is 60-40 run this year, that's not all going to suddenly mean, oh, all these receivers are going over to Eugene, right? It's not going to happen that quick, but it kind of happens over time. If Chip likes what he's doing, as the OC of this team. And, because we know why he left UCLA, all the other things now that are involved with college football, he just wanted to coach ball. Okay, if he really likes what he's doing at Ohio State, how much, and we know he's got a relationship with Ryan Day based on where they coached together in the past. Okay, is this an Ohio State team that's maybe going to be built a little bit different over the course of time than maybe they have been? That's one thing that I'll keep my eye on. I don't anticipate a bunch of receivers. I don't anticipate guys in the top 5 of the wide receiver position not going to Ohio State. I just want to make that clear right off the bat here. But maybe Oregon is one of those schools that's maybe more into these battles in terms of the passing game in the future.
I couldn't think of a more perfect example than what you just threw at me. Oregon already finds themselves going against Ohio State for one of their top commits, and that's wide receiver Chris Henry, who just transferred from the Cincinnati area to Mater Dei, the number 1 wide receiver in the 2026 class. Junior Adams and company have been recruiting the position as good as anybody, really. I mean, maybe not Brian Hartline's level, but pretty damn good. And I think the big thing to watch here, Ted, with Oregon as they chase Ohio State's a team that always recruits inside the top 5.
Yes.
Oregon just got to that point this past year. That was their best program, best class in program history. And now I think that top 5 really is becoming much more realistic for Dan Lanning and the Ducks to attain every single year. So as they continue to recruit at a really high level, that's going to give us even better games. And I think we're going to be hearing Oregon and Ohio State mentioned in the same sentence a whole lot more.
Recruiting is so fun to talk about. Really, I remember back in the day, and I still do. Maybe I don't as much anymore, but man, I would live on the recruiting sites. And like I said, maybe not as much, but I love the battles. And I think maybe some of the interest of recruiting has waned because of the transfer portal. But we said this earlier in the show. If you expect to win a national championship, you got to recruit. You got to have an elite foundation of elite players. And I think Oregon and Ohio State certainly are in that category to have those elite players, right? If you're relying on the transfer portal, it's a new team every year. You can't really build much of a culture. You can't really build much camaraderie, right? I'm glad we have the guinea pig that is Deion Sanders in Colorado, because we're finding out right now. I almost made it through this show. I almost made it through this recruiting segment without saying that. But that's the guinea pig right now. I think we're finding out, okay, yeah, experienced players are good to fill holes in spots, but to completely redo your roster every year, that's not going to work. And I think teams like Oregon and Ohio State and Georgia are the proof in the pudding that says you have to recruit an elite foundation. You have to have that elite type of depth. Depth is such a key word, I think, in all of this. So recruiting is still very important in today's day and age. And I think the Ducks and the Bucks and some of those other teams are really proven that you still need to be able to do that despite the transfer portal. Okay, you still need to be able to do that to be a championship level team.
It's balance. You got to have that balance.
Yep.
And I think Oregon and Ohio State have definitely struck that balance between the transfer portal and the high school rankings. And that's why I think all of these recent additions for Oregon, Derek Harmon, Peyton Woodyard, and the like, are like, you're making the team that much better. I think that what they're going to be able to do at their respective roles in 24, Harmon and Woodyard, probably not the same level because Harmon has proven it already in the Big Ten. But yeah, I think they're both just on the fast track for success. And I think that Oregon is really proven themselves as a recruiting contender. One last guy to talk about in the recruiting rankings is Justin Hill out of Cincinnati. He is an edge rusher in the 2025 class that Oregon finds themselves contending against. I think it could very well come down to Oregon and Ohio State once again for an in-state defensive guy. So Oregon's closing in on Ohio State as far as those rankings go. But if they can go into Ohio and take one of the top players from the state, I think that would send a huge message on the recruiting trail.
And sometimes we talk about rivalries, and that's interesting. We maybe haven't talking a ton about, because you mentioned Ohio State and Oregon as a rivalry. It starts on the field, right? It's going to start October 12th. Okay. Ohio State looking for revenge from 2021. Okay. But I think where this really is, once you get into now these recruiting battles, and now you're fighting for players. I think that, like, when you see in conference, right? You guys, that's another one. Now you guys, both Oregon and USC are coming over. You maybe have those Southern California recruiting battles where there is a plethora of talent down there. So I'm very curious to see how maybe USC factors into all of this out on the West Coast and some of this Big Ten recruiting as well. They maybe have been a little bit more national, grabbing some really good players in the 25 cycle out of down south in the state of Georgia. So, and I think recruiting itself is going more national, right? There maybe was the day where Pete Carroll could just sit and draw a circle, a 70-mile radius around LA. We're going to recruit that. We're going to be a championship team. Now, you still like to do that. Texas A&M would love to do that around Houston, Miami. You know, you have some of these certain markets of recruiting that you can do that, but you still need to be national, I think, in some senses. But that's where you see like some of these recruiting battles over in the state of Ohio for some of these kids that you mentioned. So it starts on the field, and then I think on the recruiting trail, right, it kind of expounds from that. And I could see maybe Oregon and Ohio State having maybe two epic battles if they get a rematch in the Big Ten championship game this year, and then you follow it up with each being an elite recruiting battles. That's how kind of rivalries get off the ground, and that's how things really kind of start, both on the field and off the field as well.
We had to get some recruiting in there, Ted. I mean, I can't go a podcast without talking about recruiting, and we've covered some awesome stuff here, man. But we're coming up on an hour, so I think I definitely want to wind down here, man, and let you get on with your night. Just any final thoughts here as we kind of put a bow on this Ducks versus Bucks podcast, and I think it's going to be one of the better rivalries in the Big Ten.
I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited about what Oregon brings to this conference. I think last thing that I want to mention, and I just thought of this the other day, thoughts just kind of pop into my head at certain points during the day, and what you were saying before, I believe like Oregon was always going in a great direction coming off of this last season, even though maybe it didn't end up the way they wanted it to. But there was an opportunity, okay, depending on who you ask, how real that opportunity was, for Dan Lanning to end up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And this program, this commitment by Dan Lanning, like everybody slapped on a t-shirt, the grass is damn green in Eugene, right? It's a great thing to put on a t-shirt. It's a great slogan. But it goes a little bit deeper. That commitment by Dan Lanning, okay, because he was on the Alabama staff briefly throughout his coaching tenure. I believe it was only for like a year, maybe 2 years. I don't know, something like a very short period of time. But there was an opportunity for him to go down there. And when he spun that and he put out that video and he said the grass is damn green in Eugene, because you look at Oregon and what has happened as of late. Chip Kelly goes to the NFL. Mario Cristobal, Willie Taggart, some of these other guys may be leaving for other jobs, and maybe this was just another one in the line where Lanning would have gone down to Alabama. But when he committed to Oregon and he says, everything I need is right here, that almost, to me, at the time, maybe I didn't realize it, but as I was able to kind of digest it, a month goes by, 2 months goes by, Dylan Gabriel comes to Oregon. Jabbar Muhammad comes to Oregon. Derek Harmon comes to Oregon. Dante Moore comes back to Oregon instead of being a starter somewhere else. All of a sudden, maybe it's something like his commitment is maybe the turning point for Oregon to make that true next step to being a national championship contender. The more I kind of really think about that day or two, in what December was that? Sometime in December, sometime in the winter. Forgot exactly when it was, but January. I can't remember when it was. But when that happened, that may be the turning point. His commitment, because there's no doubt about it, he can be one of the best coaches in the country. His commitment to Oregon and saying everything I need is in Eugene, Oregon. That's maybe the thing that has taken Oregon to that next level as they enter the Big Ten Conference. So really excited about the Ducks being in the league. There's a lot of change. I think there's going to be a lot of unpredictability, not only in Eugene, but in all of the Big Ten, which makes it most exciting. I've been really touting it over on my side as the most anticipated season in college football history when you look at big time shifts in conference realignment, right? When you look at the Big Ten, obviously, with 4 new schools coming in, no divisions, right? RIP Big Ten West. Everybody loved it here. But all that tough style of football. You look at the Big 12 and how different that is. A 12-team playoff, the video game coming back. I think this is almost the most, everything's kind of coming up where there's so much excitement, there's so much newness, there's so much anticipation. it's slated to be an awesome season.
The excitement has never been greater
Yep.
for college football. And that's why guys like you and me talk about it all throughout the offseason. It's really become a 365 year round type of thing. Loved what you had to say about Dan Lanning and how he's just bought in to this program on a level that past head coaches just quite frankly haven't been. So I think that's kind of one of the biggest pieces that makes the difference here for the Ducks. But Ted, before we get you out of here, man, I wanted to just, ask again, where can people find you and just any other stuff you want to plug on the show?
Yeah, so BigTenTed over on YouTube, putting stuff in the off season, trying to do 3 days a week. Some days it's 2, but most of the time it's about, I try to do 3, about 8 to 12 minute pods or videos. Hoping to kind of in the future, sometime during this off season, hoping to launch a more regular, long form type of podcast as well. So more information could be coming out on that in the next few months as well. Over on Twitter at BigTenTed, big B-I-G. Geez, my brain is getting fried. BigTenTed, spell it out on Twitter, BigTenTed over there on X/Twitter as well. So I put out a good amount of content on there as well. So you can catch me on those 2 platforms. There's audio podcast right now is on Spotify, BigTenTed over on Spotify. But like I said, that could be coming to different platforms in a little bit of a different format here this offseason as well. So it's been really fun interacting with some of these West Coast fans, including Oregon fans. And I can't wait. So yeah, just subscribe, follow on all of that stuff, kind of all over the place, video and audio.
Absolutely. Well, guys, you make sure you tap in with Ted over on BigTenTed on YouTube. If you want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at mtorresports. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck YouTube channel. And while you're at it, subscribe to scoopduck.com. You can try us out for a whole month for just $1. Me and Justin Hopkins over there. And then share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. A huge thank you again to Ted for coming on. And thank you to you guys for tuning in and talking some Ducks versus Bucks. Until next time, we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.